Okay. Hey everybody, my name once again is Amber Melanie Smith, and thank you for coming back to my YouTube channel. I am here with a special guest today. This is Laurence Pagnoni. Did I get that right?
Perfect.
From LAPA Fundraising, and you're in New York, aren't you?
New York City, yes.
Awesome. Well, you all had some great questions about fundraising. So I have some fundraising experience, but it's of course always best to look to the professionals. So I wanted to get a real pro in here to answer some of the questions that you all have asked.
A lot of people don't know what a professional fundraiser does.
Mm-hmm.
And so at some point, I'd like to talk about that. But in brief, we try to figure out the best revenue stream for different nonprofits that will raise the most money. And by revenue stream, I mean things like private grants, government contracts, fees for service, individual giving, wills and estates and bequests. The list goes on and on. But figuring out what the right approach for your nonprofit takes a little bit of art and a little bit of science.
Yeah, I hear all the time from people just starting out who just automatically assume grants. And I counsel them, grants might be appropriate for some, maybe not for others, and they're not as easy to get as you think. So that's just an interesting topic, how there's so many different ways to fundraise out there.
There's 106,000 foundations and growing in the United States alone, not including the international foundations. And they have huge endowments, so it's very seductive when you look at, wow, the Ford Foundation has $60 billion. What do they do with all that money, and can I get some? But in fact, grants are a very passive way. As fundraisers view it, they're a passive way of fundraising. They could be terrific, and there's some nonprofits that have grants at the centerpiece, but depending on where you're located, like if you're in Miami or New York City or Los Angeles, I'm sorry, not Los Angeles, Chicago or DC, private grants may be the winner, but not so much in other areas of the country, especially rural areas.
That's really interesting. I never thought about being geographical like that. Okay. Well, I'd love to get into, you mentioned several ways that nonprofits could raise money. What are some of the most successful ways that nonprofits raise money?
Well, I have a surprise for your audience. You'll be surprised to know that the #1 way that nonprofits raise their revenue is fees for service. And that is usually an unspoken aspect of the sector. So earned revenue versus unearned revenue. Unearned revenue is a financial way to talk about philanthropy, but earned revenue is fees for service. And would you have a guess as to how many if the sector were 100%, how many have fee for service as their dominant source of revenue? What do you think, Amber?
Oh my gosh, 60.
Very good guess. That's most people guess like 10 or 15%. It's actually as high as 72%.
Wow.
So to give your listeners an example, so if you have a daycare center and the parents are paying, it's a nonprofit daycare center, and the parents pay a fee for their child to go there, or they get a subsidy from the government to go there, that's fee for service.
Yep. Boys and Girls Club membership. Yep. And, in my nonprofit, we do that with some consulting and project management and event planning as well.
And then government contracts is the second most successful way that nonprofits raise their money, especially if you're social services. And then that's followed by individuals. Now, a lot of times when you go to a fundraising conference, you'll hear people say, individuals are the largest revenue stream. And that has to be taken with a grain of salt. There's a lot of nonprofits who don't have the ability to reach individuals. So social media helps break through that. Crowdfunding breaks through that when you get the donor's contact information.
Yep.
If you don't get the donor's contact information, sneaky old Facebook, hiding the donor's contact information in many situations, not good. Fundraisers need the contact information because we have to then circle back to the donors to ask for increased giving to get them into your monthly giving club, and to get increased giving, because as people age, they give away more money because they have more money.
Okay, so, we talked a little bit about how surprising it was that, fees for service or earned income followed by government contracts and then maybe individual giving was to a lot of people who are just starting out in this. And again, I talked about how so many people assume grants are the top way to fundraise and always looking for those grants. But what are some other misconceptions people new to nonprofits have about fundraising?
Well, I think a lot of new people think it's transactional, which means, you apply, you get, you ask, you get. But it's not transactional, it's relational. And relational fundraising always raises more revenue for a nonprofit. What does it mean to relate? Well, for lower level donors who give $1, $5, $25, you have to automate the cultivation and resolicitation of those donors through technology. If you're a small nonprofit, automation may seem like, a daunting concept, but there's lots of ways you can automate your giving. I mean, just a simple email service like Constant Contact or MailChimp, they have tons of automation features which are pretty easy to understand. So you can write a thoughtful email. It can go out once a quarter. You can give an update by email and solicit twice a year for increased giving. Boom, you have more relational fundraising. And in some of those email platforms, if you have a small list, they allow you to use it for free. I think it's like up to 5,000 emails, or I've forgotten the number. But the second misconception I'd mention is that a lot of nonprofits think you don't have to invest in fundraising, and they try to do it on the cheap, which, I'm a frugal guy, I get that. But, on the other end is you get what you pay for. And investing in fundraising always, if it's the right investment, will produce a return for you to grow.
Yeah.
But so many nonprofits stay, painfully small. And in fact, 72% of nonprofits in the sector in the United States live on an annual budget below $250,000 a year. And it's primarily because they don't invest in fundraising. So a misconception is that the fundraising will just happen, but you have to invest in it.
Yeah, on your first point about relational, that's hard to learn, because you kind of go into it thinking, it's a wonderful cause. Why wouldn't everyone just want to come support? But I liken it to having that friend who's always texting you or knocking on your door trying to get some money, but they never ask how you're doing. You have to build a relationship with someone before they will want to or be inspired to give you their money. Especially in America, where talking about money is kind of awkward or taboo, and that's really interesting. And I personally have experienced on the second misconception that you mentioned, investing in fundraising. It feels challenging because you're like, well, I don't have any money. What if I can't get a return? Why would I put something into this effort that could be a risk. We could lose it all and then we'll have nothing. But every single time I, through my nonprofit, have invested in capacity or fundraising, it has always come back in a return. And it's kind of like that old business saying, you got to spend money to make money.
Yeah.
Same thing.
There's a fair amount of fear that if I make the investment, will I be guaranteed a return? No, there's no guarantees. Very few guarantees in life in general, let alone fundraising. What you can rely on is that if you stay in process and have the right approach, figuring out the right approach for your fundraiser, for your nonprofit is, eight tenths of the battle. That's where turning to a professional fundraiser to figure out your strategy and your approach. But you don't need to hire a professional fundraiser like me. I mean, the larger nonprofits hire LAPA Fundraising because they have, big goals. Like we just raised $4.5 million in 22 months for a humane society to protect the cats and the dogs in Westchester, New York. So, if you have serious goals like that, you need a serious fundraising team. But the Grassroots Fundraising Journal, grassrootsfundraisingjournal.org, you can get their free tips on fundraising, how to raise $1,000, how to raise $500. Kim Klein is the founder of that, and she's just terrific. Or my blog, lapafundraising.com. We're a free blog. Every Thursday, we give a tip on fundraising, and you learn a lot that way. So it's better to start becoming familiar with how fundraisers think, and then you'll get a lot of tips for free from those two sources.
Yeah, and I'll include a link to his blog and any other resources that we talk about in the description below, so feel free to check that out. Okay, so here's a question I get a lot, and I know personally, when I just started out with the nonprofit world, the idea of asking people, especially people I knew, for money was very, very intimidating. So what tips do you have for someone who is starting out, wanting to help either a cause that they love or starting their own nonprofit, but they're just kind of terrified of asking for money?
Well, I want to give a shout out to those who feel that anxiety. It's not crazy. It makes sense to me, even though I've been raising money for over 50 years. Asking for money and money in general is one of the three basic taboos of life, according to Sigmund Freud. Sex, death, and money. They were the three core taboos from Freud. The fear of asking for money all depends on how you were raised. Some of us were raised by parents who talk to us about money, and we don't have as much fear. Others of us were raised where money was kept secret. So for those with those backgrounds, we have to do a little bit more work. But I'm here to say to you that I've seen some terrific fundraisers born out of overcoming and dealing with their initial hesitations and fears about money, because they discovered that asking for money was the path to fueling their mission. Without the revenue, your mission is dead on arrival. So part of growing as a leader in a nonprofit space is figuring out the revenue stream and becoming more comfortable with asking for money. So many people start out, that's why many people gravitate to grants initially, because they're a little bit at arm's length. It's more of a clerical exercise. You write a good letter, you follow the application formula, and lo and behold, you get an email back saying, congratulations, you got $5,000. It's like, wow, this is great business, But more often than not, you get rejection letters, and that's not so good. But it is one of the taboos. I suggest that a way to deal with it, if you're feeling a little pickish about asking for funds, role play it with someone you trust who has coaching skills. And if the situation is sitting down with a colleague to ask them to support your nonprofit, write out what you'd think you'd say, share your thoughts with your role-playing coach, and do it. And stay in role, though. Don't get out of role until you fully solicit that colleague. And you'll be shocked at how fast you learn from it. There's videos on YouTube about how to ask for money, so you could look at those too.
Yeah, I liken it to public speaking. You know, it's terrifying, but when you practice it more and more, it gets more and more comfortable. And there's another professional fundraiser in my area named Gail Perry. Have you heard of her?
Oh yeah, we're colleagues, and I.
Oh, that's amazing! Yeah, Gail's the best. And I love how she puts it. She talks about giving money as an act of love. You know, people who donate their money do it because it's their way of loving the community, of loving the cause, and you're giving them a gift by giving them an opportunity to give your cause the money, which just blew my mind when I first heard that, because you always think like you feel so guilty asking for money, but actually you're giving people a way to feel like they belong to your mission, and that can be very powerful.